Thanks for tuning in to Women's Voices. I'm Genevieve Gluck, and in this episode, I spoke with a radical feminist from Russia named Natalia. We discussed various problems facing women in Russia at the moment, including male violence, female genital mutilation, sex trafficking, and the Russian government's 2017 decision to decriminalize domestic violence for first-time offenders. We also spoke briefly about gender identity ideology in Russia, which has not yet taken hold due to the conservative political climate. Hi, nice to be talking with you today. And I wonder if first you could introduce yourself for everyone.
Okay, so I'm Natalia. I'm living in St. Petersburg, Russia, and I'm a radical feminist. Well, in general, I've started my career at the university. I have a degree in political science, but several years ago, I left educational system for good, and recently I'm working in tourism. Yeah, it's a difficult time for us now because of pandemic, but we're trying to do our best. Well, as for feminism, I think that I become a feminist about 8-10 years ago, something like that. I'm not involved into any political activities at the moment. It's mostly discussion groups online.
So to begin with, what are some of the most significant challenges that are being faced by women in Russia right now?
Well, male violence for sure is the main challenge faced by Russian women in a broad sense. It's a huge systemic sex-based oppression. And I would say that main problem now is a conservative turn in the attitude of state towards the problem of inequality of women. And it became obvious, especially after year 2004, after when Vladimir Putin was elected for the second time. And since then, conservatives, they consistently driven women out of decision making. So it's extreme, and of course, the extreme form of these restrictions is the right to abortions. If you don't own your body, you are limited in everything else: education, work, political participation. So authorities and Russian Orthodox Church, pro-life organization, and actually these pro-life organizations, they have ties with this, organizations of the same kind in the US. And they are lobbying now for exclusion of abortions from compulsory health insurance, which is free of charge. And women who want to make abortions, they are attacked by doctors and psychologists who are trying to persuade them to keep the baby. None of them actually cares what's going to be with the baby when baby will be born. So it's a conservative rollback in the society. And the last example I can talk about is large numbers of Russian men in social media. They actively support Taliban in its actions against Afghan women. Like, they say, finally women will be put in their place. And this fact characterizes these Russian men and the whole narrative a lot. The other main problems we have to deal with are femicide, domestic violence, sexual harassment, trafficking, and sex exploitation of young girls from marginalized families. According to unofficial data that are taken from non-governmental organizations who fight modern slavery, every third girl in Russia who raised in orphanage ends up in prostitution. Well, you know the last data according to the recent study by the Russian consortium of women's non-governmental organization that over 2/3 of women killed in Russia, they were murdered by family or relatives, mostly men, and it's 53% of victims of family violence were killed by their partners. Well, the other problem is a number of professions that are still restricted for women. This list of restricted professions appeared in the USSR in the end of 1970s. Recently, it was reduced, but still not enough reduced. Women cannot work officially in more than 200 professional activities. Officially, they're considered dangerous for reproductive health. But anyway, it's apparently squeezing out the female labor force from the market. In fact, violation of rights and injection of gender stereotypes starts in school education. Very good example is Lyceum, IT Lyceum in Kazan, it's a high school, where the girls were not allowed to apply. So they enrolled only boys. And they say that boys need STEM and creativity, and girls need housekeeping and other things like that. What else? It's practically ignoring the spread of misogynistic ideas in the web and everywhere. And this, and they actually not qualified as extremists, and monstrous victim blaming against women, sexualizations. And what is especially I would like to attract the attention is problems of women in North Caucasus. I mean, such regions as Chechnya, Dagestan, Ingushetia, and many others, where religion, Muslim religion and patriarchy is very strong, and they act roughly. Female genital mutilations spread there, honor killings, bride kidnapping, and normally men take children from their ex-wives after divorce, and even judgment court said that children should live with their mother. These fathers and their families, they do everything not to give it to a mother. So it's like local Taliban. I don't know how to call it, but anyway, women in these regions, they have no rights at all and try to escape. Last case is related to Chechen lesbian woman Halimat Taramova. She tried to escape from her husband and abusive family of her father, and tried to hide in a refugee for victims of abuse, but she was kidnapped from there. And as far as I understand, there are no any legal ways to take you out of the family, and activists, they are not sure if she is still alive. So briefly, it's about the situation.
That's really shocking information, particularly, well, all of it, but I was really surprised to hear you say that men in Russia are cheering on the Taliban.
I would not say that it's all them, but many of them, because you know, if we talk about some women's rights group, feminist groups, I mean, accounts in social media, there are not so many followers. But if we look at accounts of such group as Men's State, it's a misogynistic male group. They're abusing women online. They're persecuting them online, and there are many Nazi and incels involved in these groups, and many of them support the ideas like that. And speaking about Taliban, this organization is officially still prohibited in Russia, but as long as Russian government had some negotiations with these people, and I don't know because I don't watch state TV. What do they say there? But they are quite normalizing. I think they're normalizing this terroristic regime. Unfortunately, lots of men they feeling the same. They say the same things.
There are very few media outlets that tend to report on the situation of Russian women in English, but I had seen one that made the media because it was so shocking, where this Russian YouTuber locked his girlfriend outside in the freezing weather when she was in the nude as part of an online challenge, and she froze to death. And this was like aired publicly on YouTube during a live stream. Yeah, do you remember that as well?
Of course, I remember that. And there are many things like that, and actually the charges and punishment I think is quite moderate and not enough. Well, I just another example, quite recent example when man poured not an acid, just a second, but here burned his wife to death, but it was considered by the court as an accident, and he walked free. It was in the south of Russia, in Rostov. Can you imagine?
Wow. Wow, that's really. So it sounds like not only is the problem of violence against women very severe in Russia, but also the sentences or the penalties are either non-existent or too light.
If we speak about the response of the government, Russian authorities, they doing almost nothing. In most cases, they denied the existence of problems like gender-based violence, domestic violence, and femicide, etc. And I also would like to mention another case. It's who was also quite famous in media, a case of woman Margarita Gracheva. She lost both of her hands in December 2017 when her husband attacked her with an axe. And a few months before this incident, she appealed to the police that her husband beat her up and threatened her, but they did nothing. Actually, he was sentenced for 14 years, and it was really difficult for the lawyers to prove that he kidnapped her, because he attacked her in the forest. He took her out on the car and attacked her in the forest, where he cut her hands by the axe. So actually, could be less than 14 years in prison, and also it was a big deal to deprive him of parental rights. And because I heard that it's quite the same problem in Britain, that even man is considered as abuser, but only in the towards his wife, but he is not deprived of the parental rights because he attacked his wife, not his children. So it's almost the same situation. So it's really it's a big deal for the lawyers who are involved in these cases to put these perpetrators into jail.
A few years ago, I believe it was in 2017, the government decriminalized the first-time offenses of domestic violence.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, instead of approving the law on domestic violence, they did quite opposite. And yeah, now the first time offense is not actually a crime. So it's just a small penalty for this, like 5,000 rubles, and you and they pay this penalty to the state. So it's actually this woman I told about, Margarita Gracho, she was really sorry. So he beat me, but he pays this money to the state for because he beat me. And yeah, after it happened, this decriminalization, I think it's one of the problems that men, they feel absolute impunity, and they think they can do whatever they like within their partners and family members.
During the pandemic that's been going on all around the world, there's been reports of increasing domestic violence. Is that also the case now in Russia as well?
Yeah, it's the case. I don't remember the exact percentage now, but I'm following several non-governmental organizations who deal with it, and crisis centers. They report that the rise of the numbers of the cases.
I remember seeing a statistic, and I'm not going to get this exactly correct, but something around the number of 40 women every day die as a result of domestic violence in Russia. Do you remember that also?
Yes, I remember this. But it's not the recent data. It's several years ago. Yeah, but even if we look to the official statistics of related to domestic violence and victims of domestic violence, I mean, that are provided by the police and Ministry of Internal Affairs. Yeah, it's shocking. It's just official statistics. And speaking about North Caucasus, we don't know exact statistics because they don't report honor killings. We don't know how many women were killed exactly because they are disgrace for the family.
There's no official data kept on the honor killings?
I think, yeah, they don't provide because North Caucasus, especially Chechnya, after the war, it's controlled by a local elite, and all the police and officials, authorities, they are involved in this clan system, and of course they hide numbers, and we don't know exactly. It's total corruption over there.
There was recently a case involving three sisters who killed their father, claimed that their father
Yes.
was actually abusing them and beating them horrifically. And then they went to court and there were some protests in their favor. I believe the name is the Khachaturian sisters case. Could you talk about that?
Yes. Yes, the Khachaturian sisters. It was really a shocking case, and it is still on. The last news about this case, that new psychiatric evaluation improved their chances, and probably the siblings won't go to jail for stabbing their father. The psychiatric experts of the recognized clinic, they say sisters were suffering from PTSD at the time of the crime, so it's proved, and even experts and lawyers, they were talking about it for all of these years. And also now they started investigation against their father, Mikhail Khachaturian, and it is proved that he sexually abused at least two elder sisters. But their case is still not dropped, so they are under investigations. They don't have internet, they don't have opportunity to talk to each other, so they haven't seen each other, I don't know, maybe for already 2 or 3 years. It is prohibited for them, but their court hearings, they are delayed all the way. So they might be last year, but they have been postponed for several times. So it's also a trial, a torture for all of them. So after everything that happened for them, for after years of abuse, and it was proved by psychiatrists that they have been abused since 2014. So after all of these years of abuse, after they finally fought back, they still don't know what's gonna happen to them.
So, for those who don't know, this occurred in 2018. So, they've been waiting for their trial for 3 years now. And public
Yes.
protests were held in Moscow and St. Petersburg and some other
Yes.
cities calling for a change in the legislation around domestic violence. And if they are convicted of premeditated murder, they could be imprisoned for 20 years.
Yes, but hopefully after this psychiatric expertise and investigation against their father, we hope maybe the outcome wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah, let's hope so. We don't know for sure when the trial will be.
No, must have been last year, but due to pandemic and other obstacles, which was called as the official reason, there were still no trial.
So, what are the options for women who are victims of male violence in Russia? Are there any well-known women's rights activists or organizations that are campaigning for their protection, or possibly other kinds of shelters for women fleeing domestic violence?
It's in Moscow center, Anna Kitish, and in St. Petersburg there is one of the oldest crisis center that have owned several options for shelters, but they are already reaching out of their capacities, and of course they depend a lot on donations. So it's a charity or non-commercial organizations. As for the politicians, unfortunately, there are very few politicians who fighting for and lobbying the law on domestic violence. I would name two of them. Firstly, it's Aliona Popova. She's a journalist, activist, and now she's running for parliament elections from one of the parties. So not sure she will be elected as the representative, but anyway, she campaigns a lot, makes films, interviews, speaking out in social media. The other one is Oksana Pushkina. Even she is member of United Russia Party. It's the most influential party now, the party who supports all the politics of Russian government. But anyway, she really supports the law on domestic violence and do whatever possible for her in the parliament to push this law. But as far as I know, now she's not running this time for the parliamentary elections. So actually, there are only two names. So one more, she's not politician, she's a lawyer, Marie Davtyan, and she's involved in Khachaturian sisters case, and was involved in Gracheva case, the woman who was attacked by her husband and lost her hands. So she's prominent lawyer and also tries to help these women to attract the attention to the problem. Speaking about North Caucasus, it's a very brave woman. I think it's really brave to be feminist in such a region where Muslims and patriarchy are so strong and have power. Svetlana Anokhina, she's a founder of a website Daptar.ru, and she's speaking out about on violence, male violence in North Caucasus, tries to help women who want to escape from the abusive families. So I would also telling the truth about life of North Caucasian women. I think she is one of the bravest women. But it's in fact where women have very few opportunities to speak out against male violence. Feminists threatened by men and the police, and prosecutors complain on feminists. Also, we are threatened by owners of social networks in a repressive manner. They try to squeeze out feminists and those who speak against male violence from the information, all the information. They shut us with the bans. So I know very well that the same thing happens everywhere. So social media, which used to be one of the very few opportunities for women to assert themselves, and then now they are introducing censorships in the interest of men. Well, for example, one of us, feminist, was banned for commenting in Facebook that gender-based violence is caused by men's gender socialization. It's in Russian segment of Facebook. So probably I believe that support of, say, Facebook, Russian-speaking support is occupied by men, mostly misogynistic men from Russia, Ukraine, maybe Poland, those who knows the language. So it's very few opportunities for us to speaking out almost everywhere, and media narrative, not all of them support us.
Until recently, Russia has been one of the few countries in the world where the surrogacy industry is fully legalized, but it seems that recently there's an attempt to ban commercial surrogacy or altruistic surrogacy as well within the country after a baby boy was found to have died in a trafficking ring. And the rules, as I understand it, would only apply to, for example, homosexual couples or foreign couples, but the industry would still persist for Russian citizens. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. Well, in fact, it's an awkward moment when you partially support the officials in this case, because, yeah, Russia, for instance, neighbor country, Ukraine, it was one of the flourishing market of surrogacy, and high numbers of foreigners, they were coming before the pandemic to buy here a baby. I know that there were many Chinese clients in St. Petersburg. So it's a rich Chinese people who were coming here and were buying the baby for themselves, exploiting locals, and probably not only marginalized local women, but poor migrant women as well. And after several cases related to death of a baby, which were born due to surrogacy technologies, they decided to restrict it and to ban it for international, for foreign couples. I think officially it was always not allowed for homosexuals. But I know several celebrities in Russia, pop singers. They are not, were not. I would say they are closeted homosexuals, but everyone knows, I think, that they are gays, and they have children from surrogate mothers. But officially, I think it was allowed for single men, but was not written out that it allowed for homosexuals. Now, yes, they want to restrict it and to allow it only to heterosexual couples, and I think there are some age restrictions and maybe duration of marriage, something like that. So anyway, yes, they ban international surrogacy, but they will still allow to exploit women. It's in limited numbers, but anyway.
Gender ideology seems to be spreading in Russia. First of all, is it becoming more popular in Russia? And secondly, are there any laws that are being changed?
Well, due to conservative turn, gender and ideology is not gaining such popularity like in Europe, the US, and the rest of the world. In Russia, most politicians, as I said, they don't share any liberal values, and but gender ideology is actively promoted by researchers who rely on academic foreign grants, some financial support. So if they want to stay in the research, they need publications in international journals, and therefore they have to include it in their research. And of course, for the international foundation, they provide grants for LGBT organizations which are promoting the trans agenda. So feminists, for instance, they don't have any financial support either in Russia or from abroad. But thanks to LGBT funding, trans agenda is actively promoted in social networks. And there are a number of liberal media that are trying to promote trans agenda and ultra liberal values, like, for instance, legalization of prostitutions and surrogacy. For instance, there is a website like equivalent to Vice or Pink News. It is called Wonderzine. They pretend to be pro-feminist results, but in fact it's not. They are promoting transgender. They promote some beauty practices and other things like that. Radio Liberty, Radio Svoboda, and BBC, Russian version of BBC. As for the number of court cases that I mentioned in Twitter, there are not so many, but they exist, yes. There were some trans-identified males who were charged, I think, in child pornography or something like that. They wanted to be put in women's jail, and their lawyers tried to put them into women's jail. But I think it's maybe 2 cases or 3 cases. And yes, I know 2 cases of trans-identified females who had risked to be put in men's jail. One of them was deported back to Belarus, where she was from, and the other one finally was put in to work in the kitchen of women's jail. So they found some compromise. There were other cases of trans persons related to labor issues, documents, parental rights, and prostitutions. It is not that many, like in the rest of the world, but media, they need traffic, and this news, they normally attract people and brings traffic. They are enjoying posting about it. So Hubbard's case, the Olympics, was discussed a lot, both in liberal media and in the sports media, and even in the federal state channel. There was a TV show that even attracted attention of International Olympic Committee. And yeah, there are a number of activists who call themselves intersectional feminists, and they support gender ideology. And time to time, there are clashes between us, radical feminists, and intersex, mostly online. It is funny, but they insist to be radical feminists because they believe trans-inclusive radical feminism exists. And maybe the biggest difference between Russian intersectional feminism and the international ones, that most of them are against of legalization of prostitution and support Nordic model. But this is the only issue we agree. They consider J.K. Rowling transphobic, attack us all the time. I think, unfortunately, many of them are quite uneducated people. Recently I was banned by one young woman who called me chauvinistic for my gender critical views. Well, as for the radical feminists in Russia, we are quite small community, but we are very convinced one. And I would say that this community is rather Russian speaking, and some of us represent other ethnos or nationality or live in another country, post-Soviet countries, I mean, or they are expats in Europe, in the US, but we have no resources and almost no media support. So some of us tried to work in NGOs, but we couldn't proceed because of being not enough inclusive or too radical.
Just to clarify, a moment ago, you said that these intersectional feminists, these liberal feminists, they do agree with you on the position regarding prostitution and the Nordic model?
Yes, not all of them, but most of them are against legalization of prostitution. They support Nordic model principles, and the other cases related to male violence, as for the transgender, they are clearly brainwashed.
The reason I find that so interesting is because when I talk to women in different parts of the world, there seems to be this pattern that trans activism associates itself with advocating for full decriminalization, which is certainly the case in countries like Canada, the UK, America, and Australia as well. The activism there is very vocally for what they call, sex work is work and trans women are women, which both, have the same kind of circular, illogical kind of ring to them. So I find it really interesting that in Russia that's not the case. Why do you think that is?
Oh, good question. Maybe because in Russia the social character of this prostitution is very evident, and its consequences too. So so I think it's because of the social and the way women are trafficked and involved, in the prostitution. And I wouldn't say that that's most of intersectional feminism. They support this idea, but yeah, most of them think that Nordic model is the best way to fight prostitution in Russia.
Regarding the sex industry in Russia, it's very much tied up with the bratva or the organized crime, isn't it?
Yeah, it's related to organized mafias and to things that is called modern slavery. Yes, you know that when people trafficked not only to sex exploitation but also to labor exploitation. It's of course it's different things, but in many ways they are the same kind because they are poor, marginalized people with no choice in life. They involved in this, and yeah, I think maybe some of these businesses they are covered by corrupted police officers.
Yeah, that seems to be the case wherever you have places where the mafia has a strong presence, that there tends to be the sex trafficking, slavery, sale of women going on as well. I want to go back to your comment about Laurel Hubbard being widely discussed in the media. What
Yeah.
what was the reaction to that in general, do you think?
In general, it of course it was in this case the society agreed that it's not acceptable. It's very few people supports this. Of course, we discussed it a lot because, well, I watch figure skating, and now International Skating Union, they applied rules for transgender athletes. So they also related, to the level to testosterone. They something like that, and we discussed it a lot on the forums. Of course, there are some people who believe that it probably won't affect the results. It's not a big deal, and probably there will be very few people who will use this opportunity to cheat. But in general, most people find it unacceptable for male body athletes to participate in competitions for women.
Do you see gender ideology becoming more popular in Russia in the future, or do you think that because of the current climate, it's not quite possible? What's your prediction for maybe like the next 5 years,
Um,
10 years?
oh, I don't know what's happening in 5 years. Now it's actually difficult to speak out on everything, and any protesting in the streets, they are stopped by the police, and because of future elections. And So it's becoming difficult to speak out on everything. But I just think maybe patriarchy in Russia, they didn't understand yet. They haven't understand yet the advantages of gender ideology for them. Maybe, but I don't know. But anyway, church is against it, and politicians are against it. Maybe if theoretically there will be some changes in the regime, but it's theoretically, I don't see any opportunity for this in the nearest future. Probably if liberal politicians and liberal party will gain power in Russia, they will decriminalize prostitution, they allow surrogacy for everyone, and they will promote gender ideology. So, but yes, the whole political system should change. So now gender ideology is spreading most online, but it's still dangerous. Even it's not supported officially, it's still dangerous for the youth. I follow in some channels, accounts in Instagram and in Telegram. I've seen videos from TikTok. It's affecting young people. You know that young people, they are young rebels, and they want to try something different, to be not like other people.
I think one of the most successful strategies of all of this gender ideology has been to pretend that it is the opposite of conservatism, right? So, for example, in order to fight back against conservative or regressive ideas about men and women, then the way that you're supposed to do that is by supporting this agenda, when in reality, it's quite the same thing in a different packaging. So
yes, but people don't understand it. They really think it's progressive.
it's rebelling against the regressive ideas by literally embodying the regressive ideas. I just find it so baffling that people don't see that.
Yeah, they don't see the obvious things. Actually, yeah, I told you I was recently banned by this young woman. She is mixed race, so her father is from Africa, and she's Russia. She was born in Russia. She's Russian speaking, yes, but she's mixed race. So and she believes that blackface is not like is a different thing. And it couldn't be said that it's the same kind like women's costume in transgenderism. So they don't understand other things, and it's difficult to argue, to have discussions with them, because for them it's a sort of religious narrative.
Yeah, there is something so religious about it all. When I was looking into this aspect in particular, I came across something called the Skoptsi, which is actually a Russian religious
Yes,
sect.
yes.
Oh, you know about that? Yeah, yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, it's like a religious sect that appeared in Russia in the end of 19th century. They believe that the only way to save their souls is the fighting the flesh. They literally were doing it, and it was prosecuted by the officials of Russian Empire. So it was prohibited in 1929 in USSR.
So one interesting thing about them, the Skoptsi or the Skoptic sect, was
Mhm.
that not only where there's so many of them. There were about 100,000 people. I mean, it wasn't just a small kind of fringe movement. 100,000 is a lot of people. And they were doing double mastectomies and they were also castrating men. So they had believed that sexuality was sinful, or that they wouldn't be able to go into heaven unless they
Yes.
underwent these procedures, right? So they were kind of referred to as sort of a eunuch cult in a way, but they were also doing mastectomies on women. And so it was this whole religious movement and fervor of, self-mutilation. And it went on for a few decades, this practice. And there's something there about what's going on now. Like you mentioned, kind of this religious feeling about the whole movement. It feels like it's related in some way about, controlling of sexuality, controlling of the body, being virtuous, being a good person, like a kind of self flagellation to reach one's true self. And I just found it so fascinating that this religious movement was happening in Russia. And interestingly, the Russian Orthodox Church was the one that was opposing them.
Skopje, they understood the principles very literally, and they didn't support most principle of the church, and they also blamed actually in the church in corruption and doubted in Bible in some ways. So actually, they were not. I think they were not Christians. That's why they were persecuted. In fact, they were sect, but they went away from the principles of Russian branch of Christianity.
Apparently, part of the whole tradition or rite of passage of going through these kinds of surgeries or mutilations, as they were, was that the men would be dressed in women's clothing and then paraded through the towns and ridiculed. So it was important that they were made fun of. And I mean, I see these things as very much linked, where you have the constant assertion that trans women are the most marginalized women, which of course it makes no sense, but it's almost as though saying it again and again is some kind of validation or some kind of, point of pride in a backwards way. And then, when you look at a country like Russia, where you have at least 40 women being killed every day in domestic violence, where you have the law allowing men to hit women on the first time offense for very, very little, maybe pay a fee, maybe a fine or something. And then to have that going on, it just boggles my mind how people can continue to say that women are not oppressed on the basis of sex. Yeah, sorry, go
In
ahead.
Russia, not only this tech, but in fact, our society are very traumatized. And actually, I'm talking to you representing not only myself. We discussed with my allies, my friends among feminists, what is better to say. And one of feminists asked me to mention also the serfdom. You know that in Russia there was a serfdom. It's a slavery model that existed in Russia for centuries until 1861. Peasants in Russia were slaves. So they belonged to a landlord. They were not considered people. They were considered things. So it's not like I wouldn't compare it with the slavery in the United States. It's a different model, but it's still slavery. And the slaves were people not from somewhere. It's where there were people from Russia who were living in the same country, and they were not considered people at all. And sort of maybe generational trauma or something that influenced later, and that's one of the reasons probably that Soviet socialist model didn't work. and we still have this sort of slavery in within our mind. I don't know how it's better to say, but probably you understand what I mean.
Right, a kind of social conditioning or internalized mentality.
Yeah, so sort of a mentality, and it affects mostly women. Yeah, for sure.
What do you think would be a good strategy for engaging younger women in feminism, particularly in Russia? So, what I mean is often this intersectional or backlash to feminism tends to be on a generation split. So, it tends to be coming from the younger generation. You had mentioned, at least in your case, in Russia, in your experience, they are supporting the Nordic model, which is a very hopeful, kind of surprising, but very positive thing. But if you were to consider some ways that you could engage younger women with feminism, what do you think would be some of your suggestions?
Well, it's only education and enlightenment, but younger women in Russia, I think actually most women, they share some ideas of feminism. They just don't want to be called feminist. It is very stigmatized and in Russia to be called feminist because the people and society always laugh at them, and that there is a huge misconception on the feminism, what it is, and it's normally, by the way, related with LGBT, and actually it's also quite bad attitude to homosexuals in Russia. So it's actually feminism it could be blamed in everything. But anyway, the hope is that many women now starting support some ideas of feminism, even they avoid to call themselves feminists. We are trying to speak to them. I have my own Telegram channel. It's still quite small, but I'm trying to translate some text from English, trying to clarify some terminology. I see the other channels that are in Telegram that are owned by young women. Maybe they have no education, but they read a lot. Maybe their language is more simple than mine, but they can explain obvious things to their followers. We have now only social networks, maybe because it's not possible for us to get into media. Official media don't want us because we are fighting male violence, and liberal media don't want us because we are gender critical. So it's for us it's a big difficult to speak out to a big public. But so in social networks where we can, and until we are not banned, we are speaking out loudly. There are many social media influencers among radical feminists who are trying their best to share their ideas, feminist ideas, with a younger generation.
Thanks for talking with me, Natalia. I want to ask before we finish if there's anything else you want to say that you don't feel you got a chance to say, or anything you want to wrap up on.
I'd like to say that I'm very honored to be invited to your podcast, and thank you very much for what you are doing and speaking out. You're very brave, I think. It's a great pleasure to to talk to you about all of these things. And again, I would like to mention that I'm speaking not only on behalf of myself, but on behalf of our small but very convinced radical feminist community, Russian-speaking radical feminist community.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to speak with you, even though the subject matter is so dire for women in Russia. But as you said, it's important to get that information out and try to educate people about what's going on. Thanks again for tuning in. You can find Natalia on Twitter at @InNatlandia. That's INNATLANDIA. And myself, I'm on Twitter at Women Read Women. You can also contact me via email at contact@womens-voices.org.